Sairam students, today in this session of English literature, we are going to start with first chapter of Footprints, A Triumph of Surgery, written by James Herriot. Let me tell you something about the author. James Alfred Wright was born on 3rd October 1916 and he died on 23rd February 1995. He was known by the pen name James Herriot. He was a British veterinary surgeon and writer. He was born in Sunderland, England. Wright lived in Glasgow during his childhood and teenage years. Also, let me tell you, he used his many years of experience as a vet to write a series of books, each consisting of stories about animals and their owners. And he was very well known for his semi-autobiographical works. Now, the one which gained a lot of popularity was If Only They Could Talk, which was released in 1970. Now, there were many series of movies and television series based on this particular book. So, on that note, let me give you a quick introduction about this lesson. Tricky, a small dog, is pampered and overfed by his rich mistress. He falls seriously ill and his mistress consults a veterinary surgeon. Does he perform an operation? Does the dog recover? The story is about Tricky, a dog, who is the pet of a rich lady named Mrs. Pumphrey. She loves her dog very much and is unable to refuse him anything he wants. Tricky is fond of eating ice creams, cakes. So one day, when Mrs. Pumphrey is out with Tricky for a walk, the narrator sees them and stops to talk. While talking to Mrs. Pumphrey, he realizes that she has been overfeeding Tricky and also had been giving him things that he shouldn't eat, due to which Tricky had started looking like a bloated sausage. Soon, Tricky got unwell, and Mrs. Pumphrey has to call Mr. Herriot, that is the narrator, for help. She does not want to send him away, but the only way suggested by Mr. Herriot is to get him hospitalized for 15 days. Then the story unfolds into how he gets unwell. So let us read the description and know more about this. I was really worried about Tricky this time. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress and I was shocked at his appearance. He had become hugely fat, like a bloated sausage, with a leg at each corner. His eyes bloodshot, and the rummy stared straight ahead and his tongue lolled from his jaws. Mrs. Pumphrey hastened to explain. He was so listless, Mr. Herriot. He seemed to have no energy. So, children, I hope you have a book and a pen to write down the difficult meaning of the difficult words that we come across. Okay, now here the story begins like this. The narrator starts telling us that how he was worried about Tricky, a pet dog. The narrator, Mr. Herriot, stops his car as he sees Tricky with his mistress, the owner. He sees Tricky with his mistress on the road, as the narrator is shocked to see Tricky because his appearance has changed. He looks like a bloated sausage. Now, what do you mean by bloated sausage? Bloated refers to excessive in size or amount. And sausage, it's a food item that is typically sold raw, or which is later on grilled or fried before eating. So the appearance of this dog is being described over here. It's compared to a bloated sausage with a leg at each corner. And how does his eyes look? They look bloodshot. Okay, that means they are inflamed. They are typical. It's a typical result of tiredness, and also they have become rheuming, which means they have become watery. And what the dog used to do, he used to just sit, used to take his tongue lolled from his jaws. So he used to sit, lie, or stand in a lazy, relaxed way. So while describing, while the while the narrator was looking at the appearance of the dog, immediately, Mrs. Pumphrey, what did she do? She hastened. She immediately tried to give an explanation. What did she say? Tricky's owner starts giving explanation. She told Mr. Heroid that she thought that Tricky was malnourished. Hence, what she used to do? She used to feed him some extra. And Mrs. Pumphrey thought that he did not have any energy and excitement. She told him that he lacked energy, and hence she used to give him more food. Let us read ahead. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition, so I have been giving him some little extras between meals to build him up, some malt and cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much really. And did you cut down on the sweet things, as I told you? Oh, I did, for a bit. But he seemed to be so weak. I had to relent. He does love cream cakes and chocolates, so I can't bear to refuse him. I looked down again at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. He had never been known to refuse food. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. And I wondered about all the things Mrs. Pumphrey hadn't mentioned. Now, here, Mrs. Pumphrey tells the narrator, that Tricky was malnourished. And because of that, he did not have any energy and excitement. She told him that she used to give him malt, cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks at night, apart from his regular meals, so that he could sleep at night. Although she gave him so much to eat, still she says that she doesn't give him much to eat. So now here we understand that Mrs. Pumphrey seems to be a kind and loving owner, and she cannot refuse anything to her dog. Then the narrator asks her if she had cut down on his sweets and he had asked her to do, to which she replies that she did it for a while, but she felt that he was getting weaker, because of which she had to stop being so harsh with him. Now, here, the words given over here is malnutrition, which refers to lack of proper nutrition. Again, the other word given, relent. Relent in the sense she does not want to be, what do we say? Relent actually means becoming less severe, or become less severe or intense. So she basically what she wanted, she does not want to trouble her dog. She did not want it to be harsh towards him. Now, so also she says that she's unable to refuse him cakes and chocolates, as those were his favorite things. Then the narrator understood that what was Tricky's problem. The dog was very greedy and could eat at any time of the day. He did not know how to say no to food even when his stomach was full. So the narrator also thought to himself of all the things that Mrs. Pumphrey would not have mentioned, which she fed Tricky. So here the narrator understood that Tricky was being overfed. Let's read further. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? Well, he has his little walks with me, as you can see, but Hodkin, the gardener, has been down with lumbago. Now, lumbago, let me tell you children, lumbago refers to a kind of, when you get a severe muscle pain, especially in your lower back. So that is known as lumbago. So there has been no ring throwing lately. I tried to sound severe. Now, I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. So here, what is the narrator explaining? The narrator questions her whether she has been giving Tricky the required amount of exercise, whether she has been, whether Tricky is doing the exercise that was told to him. So what did she tell? She told him that, Mrs. Pumphrey replies that she does take him for walks once in a while, but he is not playing his ring throwing exercise, as the gardener who takes him out to play is not coming these days because of a pain in his lower back. So in that case, he tried to sound severe. He tried to sound a little intense so that she should understand the seriousness of the matter. And what does he tell her? He tells her, the narrator tried to talk seriously to make her understand that if she did not control Tricky's eating habits and increased his exercise, he would soon fall ill. He told her that she should stay strong and strict with him and put him on a strict diet. Only then he will be fit. Let us move ahead. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriot. Mr. Harriot, I am sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult. She set off, head down, along the road, as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on, drooping in his harness. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. So here, though the narrator advised that Mrs. Pumphrey need to be strong and strict with him and put him on a diet, Mrs. Pumphrey, she accepted that although she knew that Mrs. Herriot was right, but it was too difficult for her to refuse him for anything that he wanted. But then she left the place as if she was now ready to follow the new routine. Okay, regime, which means a proper routine that is followed regularly. So Mr. Harriet was watching them go and looking at Tricky walking unsteadily. Okay, he was not walking, tottering along. He was not walking steadily. His movement seems to be quite unsteady. The narrator was also looking at the tweed coat that Tricky was wearing. Okay, now tweed here refers to a rough surface, kind of a rough surfaced woolen cloth. That kind of, it was a material of that coat. And he had a variety of coats. Okay, so we can understand that the owner, Mrs. Pumphrey, was quite loving. So he had a wardrobe full of these coats and also a raincoat for the rainy days. So this line suggests that Mrs. Pumphrey was a rich lady as she had a lot of money to spend on her dog. Okay, but the narrator knew that soon he would be receiving a call about Tricky falling ill, and it did come. Let us read ahead. The expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes. And besides, he had bouts of vomiting. He had spent all his time lying on a rug, panting. Didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. So now, the call, as expected, the call came after a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was very upset. Distraught refers to very worried and upset. Tricky would eat nothing. No, she was upset as Tricky was not eating anything, not even his favorite dishes, and was vomiting frequently. He didn't even want to eat anything. So he didn't wanted to eat anything. This word over here, bouts of vomiting, that means, repeatedly within a short period of intense activity. Within short period, he was continuously vomiting. He spent all his time lying on a rug. A rug is kind of a floor covering. Okay. Panting refers to breathing heavily. So here, the doctor was called immediately. Mrs. Pumphrey was very upset since Tricky was not eating, not even his favorite dishes, and was vomiting frequently. He didn't even want to do anything. Okay, he didn't want to do any kind of activity. So, being a vet, the narrator knew that the only way to get Tricky well was to get him out of the house for a few days. So, he suggested Mrs. Pumphrey that it would be good to get Tricky hospitalized and keep him under observation for 15 days. So, the decision over here was to keep to keep this dog under observation for 15 days. The poor lady almost swooned. Okay, the poor lady almost swooned. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill, and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay, and, followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings, I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. So, being a veterinary, being a doctor, the narrator knew that the only way to get Tricky out of this situation, the only way to get Tricky well was to get him out of the house. So he suggested Mrs. Pumphrey that it would be good to get Tricky hospitalized and keep him under observation. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Pumphrey nearly fainted. Okay, she was like swooned. She was about a partial, or you can say a total loss of consciousness. A total loss of consciousness or a partial loss of consciousness is referred to swooned. So here the narrator, okay, she was here the owner. She was sure that if Tricky did not see her every day, he would surely die. But the narrator kept his words. He told her that this was the only option as Tricky was very ill. The narrator thought it would be best to avoid any delays and get him to the hospital as soon as possible. He went to their house, and even though Mrs. Pumphrey was crying, still, what did he do? He did not want her dog to go away from her. He took the dog, wrapped it in a blanket, and put him in the car. So, even though he knew that Mrs. Pumphrey would be very upset, okay, still, for the best in the best interest of the dog, it was a wise decision to take him and get him hospitalized for few days so that he can recover from his sickness. Wailing. Now, wailing here refers to crying with pain. So, once the dog was taken, when it was decided to take the dog away from her, she was crying bitterly. Let us move ahead. The entire staff was roused and maids rushed in. So, the entire staff of the house was roused and maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys, and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. Okay, so here the entire staff was roused and maids rushed in. Okay, roused refers to rouse means cause to it is mainly cause to stop sleeping. Now here the entire staff, they were asked to, maybe they were sleeping at that time of hour, so they were asked to get up and then immediately rush and bring things for him since he was going to be hospitalized. So all the things that belonged to him. So the staff, what did they do? They roused and the maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl, everything. Realizing that his car would never hold all the stuff, what did the doctor do? He started to drive away. And while he moved off his car, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, the despairing cry showing loss of all hope. Despairing means she lost all hope, all hope. So, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats, lot of little coats that belonged to the dog. She threw it inside the window. She threw the window. So the doctor here, he looked in the mirror before he turned the corner of the drive. So what he could see, everybody was in tears. Now let us see ahead what happened. Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. I patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, I said. You haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. At the surgery, the household dogs surged round me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes and, when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. So now, let us see what happened after he left Mrs. Pumphrey. Out on the road, the narrator, he glanced down at the pathetic, he glanced at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by his side. Gasping, he was, trying to breathe heavily, gasping for breath. Yes, gasping for breath. So he was, when he looked at the dog, what did he see? The dog was, it was looking really pathetic, in the sense it was not in a good condition. So the narrator patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, he said. Now, he was really worried at the condition of that dog. He didn't know how to react. Okay, Mrs. Pumphrey, though she has given everything that belonged to them. Now, do you think that this thing will cure him? Very difficult. As the narrator was turning the car on the turn, he saw from the mirror that everyone was crying. He patted that little helpless animal, and the helpless animal, it responded by wagging its tail. Now the narrator thought and told Tricky that he knew that Tricky did not have any energy, but he surely had a way out to make him better or to get him better. Now, as soon as they reached the hospital, there were many other dogs. So all the other dogs gathered around the doctor. Now Tricky looked at all of them, and when the doctor put him down on the carpet, he couldn't even move. There were many other dogs, so they sniffed him and thought to themselves that he was a very uninteresting, a kind of boring object, and that there was no use standing close to him, and all of them left. So they all basically ignored his presence. They didn't want it to be around someone who is uninteresting. So here we understand that the condition, the state of the stock was really pathetic, in the sense he was not in a good state. He was not keeping well, and because of eating all the junk food, he has grown fat and not in a good condition. He was not fit at all. So students, we stop here, and let me tell you, in the coming lecture, okay, in the second part of this chapter, we will cover the remaining part of the lesson and the value points. So I hope students, you were able to understand this lesson well, and also you have written down the meanings of the difficult words that we came across. There also there is a link. Okay, you need to click on the link below so that you go through the home assignment and make sure that you complete your home assignment. Thank you so much.